Please support me on Patreon. Thanks to your support, I will be able to travel more and do new interesting projects. April 26, 1986. There was an accident in the reactor of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Never before has such a thing happened in the world. A huge area was contaminated with radiation. More than 100,000 people evacuated in the very first days. The process of eliminating the consequences of the accident began. Used a huge amount of equipment and vehicles. During operation, this technique was contaminated with radiation. After work, such vehicles were sent to burial ground and parking lots of temporary storage. The equipment most contaminated with radiation was buried, and the one that was not heavily contaminated was left on the sites. The most famous cemeteries of vehicles are Burakivka and Rassoha. The cemetery in Rassoha is already empty. The vehicles from there was buried, and there are still many such vehicles in Burakivka. I managed to visit the cemetery of vehicles in Rassoha in 2010. This is a huge field on which there was a lot of transport. There were armored vehicles, buses, motorcycles, cars, and even helicopters. At the end of 2012, the technology or vehicles began to disappear. Such an amount of place could not disappear so quickly, and it is not clear where it was going. Fake news from Russia several times wrote that transport from here came into service with the Ukrainian army. Later it turned out that the administration of the Chernobyl zone decided to eliminate the equipment or vehicles at Rassoha and bury the equipment in the burial ground. The vehicles that stood in the cemetery of vehicles was already unusable. There were no engines, many parts were also missing. Over the years for which the vehicle stood in the rain and snow, it became completely unusable. It was just scrap metal. In early 2013, after the vehicle was completely empty, all the technique was taken out and buried. Rassoha was a cemetery of vehicles, very interesting for stalkers and tourists who came to the exclusion zone. There were many helicopters, trucks, military vehicles. It attracted tourists from all over the world. In general, equipment worth $46 million was placed here. The field area with equipment was 20 hectares. When I first visited here, I took a dosimeter but was surprised when I started measuring vehicles, because many cars were already clean in terms of radiation. I saw an increased level of radiation only on helicopters, armored vehicles and under a fire truck. The rest of metal was conditionally clean. The main problem with this cemetery of technology or equipment was that it was located only 3 kilometers from the fence of the exclusion zone. Many residents of residential villages near the exclusion zone illegally went here to steal metal and sell it. They did not have dosimeters. They irradiated themselves and handed over the metal, which could then get to other people and irradiate them. I spoke with a resident of a village near the zone, village Potoka. The man told me how many times he went to the cemetery of Rassoha equipment for metal, and this is how the person earned money. Now we will see a very interesting place for stalkers, the burial ground Burakivka. There is still a lot of equipment here. Here the metal is mostly heavy, contaminated with radiation. Some places need to be avoided in order not be irradiated. There are trenches in which radioactive waste is buried, but there is a small field with vehicles nearby. Solid waste was buried in the burial ground, building materials, soil, asphalt, metal and other. The equipment that is here is much more radioactive than the one that was on Rassoha. This is an engineering obstacle blocking vehicle. Military special equipment. It was this equipment that destroyed houses in some villages in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Exclusion zone workers used such armored vehicles. These armored vehicles reduced the risk of personnel exposure during war, radiation. This is a patch finder. They were also used to move personnel around the exclusion zone in conditions of strong radiation. These machines worked near the destroyed Chernobyl reactor. Many of these cars drove around the Chernobyl reactor and in the most radioactive places. It is impossible to get legally on excursion here. This is the robot Joker. He worked on the roof of the destroyed reactor. The HBO movie Chernobyl also had this robot. It was brought from Germany, but it was designed for less radiation than it was on the roof of the reactor Chernobyl. That's why it broke quickly. The Joker and other robots had to remove radioactive debris from the roof of the reactor to reduce radiation. Then people worked on the roof and were heavily irradiated, but they did the job. These cement barrels are the most radioactive artifacts I have found at the Burykovka burial ground. More than 1 millisievert per hour. You can stay here for long. And here are the remains of the helicopters used by the liquidators of the accident. They flew over the destroyed reactor and dropped sand and boron from helicopters to reduce radiation. We measure the level of radiation within the normal range of radiation. And this is how Rosoha's equipment cemetery looks like now. The field where the vehicles were in now empty, but there is still a place where some of the vehicles remained. There were buses and amphibious military vehicles. Subscribe to my channel and support me on Patreon so I can make more videos for you. Thank you for you.